This is Not About You. Not About You is a podcast about identity and social justice. The premise of the show is simple. I wanted to ask marginalized folks to tell a white, straight, cisgendered guy, that's me, what question or questions they wish they never had to hear again. They did just that, and we had conversations. I'm Levi, host and producer of the show. I make podcasts, produce theater, write, and do arts education. I've also been a comedy writer and performer my entire adult life, so these conversations are full of humor. I've set up a voicemail line, 612-361-9261, where you can share comments, suggestions, and personal stories connected to any of these questions we're discussing. This episode is my conversation with Regina Mustafa. Regina Mustafa is the only person of these 10 episodes who I didn't have a personal relationship with before recording these conversations. We have a mutual friend who connected us, and she turned out to be an excellent person to connect with. In this conversation, Regina mentions going into a restaurant and having a conversation. Just for context, in September of 2016, there was a restaurant/ice cream shop in Lonsdale, Minnesota, who on their sign outside of their shop that said food, ice cream, crab fry, some price information, also included on their sign, Muslims get out. Regina went and spoke with the owner of that ice cream shop, and it was covered on the news. She was featured on the news for reaching out in that way. So that's what we're talking about there. There's also a couple of audio issues in this conversation. It's just a matter of some jewelry interacting with the microphone in ways I didn't notice at the time. I apologize, it's fairly fleeting. You can connect with the show on Twitter, @NotAboutYou, on Facebook, /NotAboutYou. Feel free to leave us comments, give us feedback. Thanks for listening. This is Not About You.
Hi, my name is Regina Mustafa, and I'm the founder of an interfaith organization based in Rochester called Community Interfaith Dialogue on Islam, or CIDI. I call it CIDI. And I formed the organization in September of 2014. And one of my biggest ways of creating interfaith dialogue is my monthly faith talk show that I hold at the Rochester Public Library. I usually hold it on a Thursday evening. It's live streamed. And each show I have a person from a different faith or spiritual tradition come onto the show and pretty much educate the public on why they believe what they believe. I identify myself as an American Muslim, but the show is not about Islam. I just happen to be the host, and I just happen to be Muslim. I'm getting ready for my 23rd show, and of 23 shows, I've only had 4 guests, including myself, that have been Muslim.
Cool. Well, Regina, thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of places we could jump into when it comes to understanding what it's like to be a Muslim American, what that experience is like. But I'm curious for you if there is an area that you think comes up a lot, and it feels like it has been dealt with a lot as well, and yet still won't go away, like an area where people ask a lot of questions or people have a lot of misconceptions.
Right. I get asked a lot, and I know other Muslims do too, why aren't there more quote-unquote moderate Muslims speaking out against Islam? And what I find is that even when you give them the proof that, it only takes a 20-second Google search to type in Muslims condemning Islam, and you'll get thousands of hits. It doesn't take long. So I quote Todd Green, who is a scholar of Islamophobia at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. I quote his book when he says that asking that question, why aren't moderate Muslims speaking out against Islam, is no longer an innocent question. That if you really don't believe that or you don't know, you don't want to know. You don't want to know. You want to maintain that Islam is this force that is slowly but surely taking over the United States. And what I find so frustrating is that for myself, I'm so out there. I'm a public figure in Rochester, considered a Muslim leader in Rochester. I'm doing all these things. There are so many Muslims in Rochester, throughout Minnesota and the United States, who are doing so many things, opening up their doors to mosques and Islamic centers, welcoming and creating dialogue. But then we get accused of, well, yeah, what you're saying that Islam is peaceful and all this. That's because you just happen to be good people. That I often encounter that people say, yeah, we recognize that the majority of Muslims don't go out and commit suicide or blow themselves up or cut people's heads off, but that's just because they just happen to be good people. It is no way related to the teachings of their faith. So I've had people say to me, to my face, that if you really knew what Islam was, you'd be a jihadist too.
It seems inherent in that, I don't know if that's feedback or what that is, but is the idea that this person knows more about Islam than a person who practices the faith?
Exactly. Exactly.
That seems really frustrating.
Yeah.
So how do you avoid just yelling at people? Which would make it worse. Would make and they'd be like, see, you proved my point. But
exactly.
Like, how do you stay in that space?
Exactly. It takes a great deal of patience. And coming from a spiritual perspective, I personally, as a Muslim, know. I mean, I am told that you have to patiently persevere in the face of ignorance and hatred. That does come from my religious tradition. And just obviously, if you're going to make any change, or if you're going to make any headway, you have to be the better person. Even though you're coming from a group that's been so demonized, and to such a level now that it's acceptable at the political, presidential candidates, it's acceptable for them to say it on a public stage, a national stage, to even that extent. But yet we need to be the better people to make any kind of headway. But yeah, because if I stand there and yell back at him, it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to feed right into what he thinks of me. And the problem is people like that, people who hate Islam, who hate Muslims, and they come in and they pretend that they know more about my religion than I do. Where are they getting their sources of information? It's not from other Muslims, obviously, because they don't trust anything I say. It comes from the Islamophobia industry, which is a multi-million-dollar industry in the United States. It comes from people who write books against Islam, people who left Islam and declare themselves to be Islamic experts. They go to those people for information about Islam. And to me, it's logical. If you want to learn about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, doesn't it make sense to go to a practicing Mormon and ask them? If you want to learn about Judaism, should I go to a neo-Nazi and learn about Judaism and get that neo-Nazi's perspective on Judaism and his perspective on why he's anti-Semitic? It doesn't make sense. You want to learn about something, you want to learn about Chinese history, doesn't it make sense to, a really good source of information would maybe be somebody who grew up and understands the Chinese language. It makes sense. So those people they're living in a defensive stage of their identity, whereas they know differences are out there, but they believe that their own existence is the only true way of being, the only true way of existence. And they have an agenda.
Yeah, and I feel like I don't have a good understanding of groups who really want to have like public outrage against just the existence of Islam. Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of empathy, but I don't fully know where that comes from. I feel like fear is at the base of a lot of things.
Right.
Not an informed fear, because usually information can decrease a lot of fear. Not always. I currently, as you mentioned, like the current political climate, the more I'm studying, it's not actually making my fear go away, just because of the possibilities of what could happen. But I wonder if you can speak to, because in my understanding, this fear or hatred of Islam, not only in the U.S., but in a lot of countries, is pretty old. For each of these 10 episodes of Not About You, I put out requests for folks to call in with responses to questions that come up in each episode. So a few people left voicemails, and I'll be sharing some of those in the middle of some of these conversations. You have reached the Not About You voicemail line. Leave a message after the tone.
Hey, Liba, Taj again. Just calling to answer another question. The question that I have in front of me are, why are Muslims viewed different than other religious communities in the U.S.? I mean, in my opinion, I think it's because people just don't understand. There's an unfortunate ignorance to just what it means to be Muslim. And I think that's because people just don't know, and they're not educated about what it means to be a Muslim. And I think a lot of it comes from fear, unfortunately, just how Muslims are usually viewed in the media and portrayed in the media. It's unfortunate, because you can't just clump an entire group of people into one category of extremists just because that's a small fraction of something that is often, what's the word that I'm looking for? I can't think of the actual word, but it's exploited a lot on the media. Like, extremist Muslims are everywhere. ISIS, blah, blah, blah. And it's just, it's so frustrating. So I think they're viewed differently because people just aren't educated about what it means to be a Muslim, and because of fear. And fear and ignorance is is rampant right now. I mean, it always has been, and I'm hoping it won't always will be, but right now that's where we are. And so, yeah, if you just don't know, I don't know, talk to somebody who is Muslim. Ask them what it's like. What does it mean for them? I personally, I know that I could be educated more on what it means to be Muslim and what it's like. So yeah, that's what I have to say. I think the reason they're viewed differently is because people just don't understand. People just don't know. So educate yourself. That's all I got. Okay, bye.
Now let's get back to the conversation. If you can speak to, because in my understanding, this fear or hatred of Islam, not only in the U.S., but in a lot of countries, is pretty old.
It is. It's very old. It's embedded in the Western mindset, in the Western culture, going all the way back to the Middle Ages, even through Orientalism. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's there. And, it came over on the boat, with all the other Europeans that came over into this part of the world. The Western experience with Islam has always been one of subjugation, of, you have the history of crusades, you have the history of warfare, then you have the history of, the Ottoman Empire, pretty much at the back door of Europe, going into even Vienna. And then you had that history. And then you had the Orientalism, which was in no way about raising up the Islamic culture, but it was about belittling it, studying it to belittle it, and seeing how it was so, inferior to Western religion and Western, the growing tide of Western secularism and just modern way of thinking. And that got brought over. It's so embedded in the Western mindset. I mean, it's only become fairly recent that we've actually are starting to have open discussions about what Islam is. It's going to take, you can't expect the people that have those mindsets that are just against Islam, who really do buy into the fear of, a Muslim takeover, and Muslims, secretly we're all trying, we're all waiting, in the shadows for the day that we can, pop on out and impose Sharia law over the United States. Those kind of people, it's not going to change overnight. It's going to take years to be able to deal with that issue. I mean, look at anti-Semitism. That's not going away. And look at the racism that we have in this country. I mean, the slaves were freed how many years ago? But we still needed a civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And it's still not. There's still so many issues. And there are the people that believe that, look, now race is no longer an issue. The same people who were like, oh, Black Lives Matter. No, all lives matter. they really don't get it. And those are the same people, who are like, why do we need to learn about Islam, yada, yada, yada. But the other thing I do with my organization, the other half of it, is that I do realize that, in Rochester, there's about 10,000 Muslims and 70 to 80% are Somali. I do believe that it's time for the Muslim population to take a step forward and learn something about their non-Muslim neighbor. If we're all like, hey, no, you need to learn what, I understand that the Muslims are the ones that are coming under fire here, so there lies the need for the education about Islam. But why not do even the better thing? And, let's have a collective movement of learning about all of our traditions, because I'm all about, yes, we find all the things that we have in common. Let's talk about the things that we don't have in common and learn to cherish them and see them as integral. All these differences are just integral in the running of our society.
I think that's really important, because I think there is, people have this desire, so if we can connect, it should be through what we share.
Right.
What is something we do have in common. But as you just described, like, you are in Rochester, and the number of Muslim people in Rochester is more than a lot of people would think. Both people in Rochester and people outside of that place.
Yep.
Same thing is true for Minneapolis and Minnesota and a bunch of countries all over the United States. And part of it is like a desire to not see, I think, where people don't know those numbers. But we share a geography. That should be enough motivation to, okay, that's our connection. We're a part of a shared community.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a constant pushback against that idea, like, you can't be a Muslim American. You're either an American or a Muslim. I see that with a lot of race issues as well.
Yeah.
The go back to blank kind of thing, which I think that rhetoric gets much muddier for Muslim folks, because there's not the one country to shout at. So then it seems like it just becomes, you should die. And I think that's maybe just a lack of creativity.
Or just don't bring them in anymore.
Yeah, well, and bring them in is like there's
don't bring them in and get rid of them as much as you can.
Yeah, but I wonder how what are some of the distinct differences? Like, what is unique to a Muslim American community, like a neighborhood community, or like, a geographical community? What makes that group different than other communities, but still able to share space and have an interfaith community as well as having its own? Can you speak to some of those sort of differences, but also similarities?
I could speak on behalf of, again, the majority Muslims that are in Rochester and Minnesota.
I want you to
Somalis,
speak for everyone in the whole
everyone. So we're going to be here a lot longer. Yeah, and I can't do that. And that's what, but you bring up a good point, is that one of the dangers is seeing Islam or Muslims as monolithic. Mm-hmm. That's a huge danger. But
that is the rhetoric, right?
That is the rhetoric, but that there's so much more to it than that. So what would make the Muslim community different? Well, definitely you have to talk about culture. And you're talking about the Somali experience, then you're talking about a refugee mindset. You're talking about a refugee experience where these people come from a war-torn area. And I mean, I'm doing my best to speak about their behalf, but I in no way want to sound like I'm some kind of expert on Somalia or the Somali American experience.
You're from Philadelphia.
I'm from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So, but they have trusting their government issues and such. I mean, it's just a completely different mindset. So they're not just immigrants; they're refugees.
Yeah. They're fleeing violent oppression.
They're fleeing violent oppression, and they're coming to a place like Minnesota. I mean, it must be like a difference between night and day for them. And when they come here, some of the things that might set them apart from other communities, of course, is the language barrier. You do see, like in Rochester, other Muslim populations in Rochester will be tied to the clinic. They're people from, the Middle East, so they're coming here for fellowships, jobs. They're coming from the Middle East or Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, these countries, and they come here and they already speak English fluently.
They're highly educated.
And they're highly educated, and they're more middle class, upper middle class than you have the Somali community, who have the language barriers, whose kids are going to school, but they having trouble staying on top of their studies because they can't get help from mom and dad with the homework because mom and dad don't speak the language. Or right after school, these kids are going to part-time jobs to help their parents pay the bills. And so, and of course, they're coming into a country where they hear all this stuff about anti-Islam. So they feel threatened. Are people out to take away my Muslim identity? It can make them feel quite isolated. all they got to do is turn on the TV and see how their new country thinks about them. So they have a lack of belonging and so much hesitancy in reaching out to non-Somali and non-Muslim communities to feel like they belong. But they are here. And the notion, but there is a huge group of, the Minnesota population and the American population that feels that resents that all of a sudden we need multilingual road signs and our tax dollars gotta, pay for that. Or so all of a sudden we have to learn about what Ramadan is and all that, and we have to learn what fasting is, and as employers we have to now accommodate more and more our Muslim employees for their prayer times during the day. These are definitely aspects of our faith that are not cultural. These are aspects of our faith that would make us different from the majority of people around us. That majority of us pray 5 times a day, and we sometimes need accommodation for that. In the school system, there might be certain things where, as a Muslim, we're not comfortable with, and, sports, and, we might dress a little differently and might not fit in with, we might need to, let's say, adapt a uniform or whatever to make it more modest, let's say, for young Muslim women athletes. All these different things come up as differences. But to me, this country has always been the land of differences.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what's so new about that? We've always been different, and our ancestors went through the same thing when they came over here. In Boston, they had signs that said, "No Irish and no dogs." But look how many Irish there are in Boston.
And dogs.
And dogs. And they all seem to be getting along fine.
Yeah.
But, as a country, as much as I love this country, we have a tendency to just constantly repeat our history instead of learning from it. And we're doing it again with the Muslim community.
Yeah, it's strange. The memory gets really short about
Yes.
The U.S. is built on outsiders.
Yes.
A bunch of outsiders wanted to go somewhere where they could figure out how to just be. Mm-hmm. But then, now I claim this and I need other outsiders to feel like an insider, and that's like a endless cycle of that happening.
Right.
But I feel like you're right. There's this cultural difference that is there, and it's visible but poorly understood. But I feel like everyone can understand the experience of not quite fitting. I feel like that's a superhuman experience.
We should.
Just being aware of that.
We're on Native American land here.
Yeah, that's true.
We're on Native American land. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
Let's not forget what we did to those people.
Yeah, and continue.
Who are we to say, to moan and wail about other people coming in,
right,
and accusing them of not assimilating? What's your idea of assimilation? That gets down to what's your idea of assimilation. Do I got to wear a cowboy hat and overalls in order to assimilate? You want true assimilation? Then maybe we should all be dressing like Native Americans. Let's pick a tribe.
I want to just quickly tell everyone, please do not dress how you think a Native American dresses.
Please don't. Yeah, please don't.
Do not take a photo and put it on Instagram.
Right.
That is not okay.
Yeah, but people think, when I found that, because I've, even on my talk show, at the end of every show I have a question and answer time, people in the audience. And whenever I do have a Muslim guest on, that's when the hecklers and the haters kind of come out from the woodwork.
Because then it becomes a Muslim show.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, and they come with their notes, they come with their heavily highlighted copies of the Quran, and they wave them in the air and accuse me and my guests of all these just amazing things. But I seem to find that when people say Muslims are coming here but not assimilating, it seems to be just the dress, I think, mainly, because it's such an outward appearance.
Yeah.
It's such an outward thing.
You can't, you can't.
If I were to take this off, how would you know I'm Muslim?
Right.
And I think that's it. People, that's the other difference, and that's a religious difference. Not all Muslim women cover their hair. Not all Muslim men have beards and wear a robe, but a lot of us do. Mm-hmm. And that makes it, in a country that is becoming increasingly secular. I mean, this is a secular nation, but I mean increasingly throwing off any sign of religion in the public space for purposes, I don't know, of being PC, whatever. I mean, I like political correctness, but there is an extreme to that as well. And then you have that, and it's in Europe as well, almost like a neo-atheist trend that is kind of sweeping Europe and here as well. And I mean, no offense to people who are atheists, but then amongst that, then you have these immigrants that are coming over, these Muslim immigrants who wear their religion on their sleeve and they're identified in public for their religion. So you have two different ways of thinking here going on, and people can feel very, very threatened.
Well, there's a weird thing of, well, why aren't you trying to be more like me?
Right.
That feels like that's part of what someone thinks
assimilation
means, whatever their experience
right. Well, my ancestors came over here and they knew they needed to learn English right away, and they fell into what was going on. How come you're not doing that?
Right.
Well, you're talking about entirely two different groups of people. You can't. But that was so different. I mean, people were so up in arms when John F. Kennedy ran for president because he was Catholic.
Yeah.
And they thought the Pope was going to take over the country. As far as I know, that didn't happen.
No,
and still we've only had one Catholic president.
Yeah, well, there's a weird baggage around that still.
Right.
One of the things you mentioned is, so you have this talk show, which I think it is significant in a lot of ways. But I think one of the things that happens is people maybe don't want to ask a lot of questions about what it really means to be Muslim. Because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, looking dumb. People fear looking dumb.
They do.
Badly. So then instead they don't learn anything. They're ignorant, and then way later say a much worse wrong thing.
Oh, you got it.
So I wonder how you deal with that with your show, because you have this question part, and so inherently there is, you could look dumb. You're interviewing someone from a different faith.
Yeah.
I know you have an understanding of those faiths. And you can do thoughtful reading and preparation, but almost like dialects, like there's individual interpretations of one's own religious experience that also make no, that's not true for me, that's true for somebody else. So is some of this about just encouraging people to be more comfortable with not being the smartest person and also just being uncomfortable? How important do you think those things are?
Because you have to be uncomfortable if you want to make change. And so the work that I do, I'm uncomfortable about 98% of the time. I just got used to it. Yeah, the show is really about creating a safe space where people could come and ask any questions they want. And let's ask the tough questions. I asked my guests tough questions right up. My first show, I asked my guests if they thought I was going to hell. And it was pretty much determined, not stated flat out, but it was determined that, yes, if you could, according to my belief, if you continue on the path that you're going, you're going to go to hell. And I'm totally okay with it. And that was the point of asking that question, that if we were demonstrating how we could handle such a heavy topic and still remain friends, still respect the religious identity. The other person I was talking to was very proud of their faith, and I respect that because I'm equally proud of mine. I like people who are proud, who stand up and shout out that they're proud of their religion. In a society that's increasingly, in my opinion, anti-religious in a lot of ways. So and of course and my show is not about having a debate. I don't have a debate with my guests. It's not about finding some flaw in the tradition of my guest and there you go. I don't like that. No, it's not about, Regina's pick of best church in town.
You're not trying to win.
I'm not absolutely not. And, none of my guests thus far have converted to Islam. So it's about, finding what true acceptance is. True acceptance is finding somebody of a different faith, and you find that they're happy with that. And you are delighted in their happiness, and you wouldn't want to change that. That's what I think true acceptance is. It's not, that's nice, but boy, I want to make your life better by once you uncover what I believe and you take that upon yourself.
One of the, strange, so I'm a vegetarian, and forgive me for this metaphor, but I'm a vegetarian, and sometimes when I tell that to somebody who is not, somebody who eats a more sort of typical American meat-based diet, there's a defensive quality that happens. Sometimes it's gentle, but an attack on me. Why? What? How do you get iron? How do you get whatever the thing is? And often I feel like that comes from a place of, if you're right, I have to be wrong.
Right.
Somehow they feel criticized by me just doing a different thing. There probably was a time when when you're new to a whatever thing, you do become kind of loud about it and obnoxious. And I feel like that is the case with a lot of faith stuff as well. And I feel like people take that on heavily from, if they see someone in a hijab, part of it is, I don't wear one of those, so I'm right and that thing's not okay. Like, they jump to that sort of an impression of women.
Or they might even think, oh, she thinks she's right, and by looking at me without the hijab on, she's judging me.
Right.
She probably thinks I'm, like, disgusting.
Right.
You
so
know.
people, there's a lot of someone putting something on you that then they take that in emotionally, and they can't come at an open place because of this weird, almost subconscious baggage of there can only be one right way.
Yeah. Well, I think that is at the basis of what I do with my work. It's true acceptance. There's recognizing that, we're not going to agree on this. We are not going to agree, and that's okay. We don't have to. How do we get to that place? I think that comes to be confident in what you believe. Are you really confident in what you believe? Do you really find the answers to your questions? You know, if you're so confident that you're right, then why does it bother you that somebody else might think you're wrong?
Oh, yeah. So it's like a self-confidence issue.
It's a self-confidence issue. It is, absolutely. Because that's, somebody thinks I'm going to go to hell, or somebody comes up to me and says, I don't believe in that. I don't believe that Prophet Muhammad is, okay. I don't care. What do you think, I'm going to get all mad and yada, yada, yada? Yeah, I don't care. Who cares? Just respect. Muslims are, I just don't want to get shot in the back of the head the next time I leave a mosque, like it happened to those 3 men in Queens when they left.
That shouldn't be a lot to ask.
Right.
Like, that is not a big ask.
Exactly.
It's sad to me that has to be your, baseline.
Yeah. Every time I do a show, I feel like somebody's going to come in and start shooting up the place. And am I buying into the fear of, come on, in 2015, there were over 300 mass shootings. I don't know. It's based off of hate mail that I get that are borderline threatening to my security, comments and bizarre people following me on Twitter, with fake names and profile pictures of James Dean and Frank Sinatra, which I always find very interesting. And humorous. I don't know if I dislike them or actually love them a lot.
Well, I'm certain those people with those avatars are not as attractive as James
Was that
Dean
you,
was.
Levi?
It was me. I'm that frog, that Pepe frog, that's me. All the James Dean, Sinatra, all the eggs, it's all me.
I thought you came off as familiar.
I have a lot of downtime.
What?
And I'm full of hate. So, honestly, I'd be most embarrassed for the constant typo and grammar problems those hate letters have. I'm like, just do your homework.
Right.
Like, if you're going to be a monster, be thoughtful about it. It's just not very creative. That's my critique. So here's a obnoxious question I'll ask you.
Please.
Because, so you are, not only are you a Muslim woman, but you're a Muslim woman in the public eye. You're doing this work in Rochester. You're putting it out on the internet, which is like one of the most dangerous places to do things as a Muslim person. Because everyone's like, oh, I can not even see them as a human. Like, I already didn't see them human in real life, and now they're like one step more removed from human.
Yeah.
So I'm not a Muslim. I'm not.
You're not?
I don't. No, I'm not.
Oh, with the beard, I thought you were. Sorry.
I can pass. I can't at all. Except if I try to pray, and you're like, none of that is right. But I want to know, and I know there are people who want to know, how do we help make this change? How do we help so that it's not normalized? Like, right now, if a person is killed and they're Muslim, it's assumed it's a hate crime, and it usually is. And then people are like, that's too bad. Let's get lunch. If somebody commits a crime and you find out they're a Muslim, immediately assumed terrorist act.
Oh, yeah.
Which is also not fair, not true, and really hard, I would imagine, on Muslim communities, where you're like, that's one person who didn't really even understand, they didn't really understand their own faith, and they had a bunch of other issues, like the shootings in Orlando, Florida, like that got so conflated with terrorism.
Oh, yeah.
And it was terrifying, but there were so many other issues happening there. So my question, all of this preface, is what can we do to help? How can we help, even if it's like help ourselves to be less of a problem?
Right.
Like I know I'm asking you to help us solve your problem, but how do we do it?
I think, helping to solve, the Western, I guess, issue with Islam, if you follow kind of the advice that I give you, I think it can also be applied to racism, the relationship with minorities, LGBTQ community.
Okay, tell us how to solve all those
All
problems.
of those, okay. So first of all, stop watching so much news. Stop watching so much news. If you watch it, local news, watch the local news and watch it carefully. Watch it critically. Okay? Don't just assume that don't trust. Don't put your 100% faith in the media. If the majority of your news is coming through Facebook and social media, stop. Okay? Yeah, especially for the younger crowd. If the majority of your info is coming from what you're getting off of Facebook, it's not good enough. And talk to people, find out what's going on in your community where you could actually talk to somebody. You might find that maybe Muslims are kind of reserved at times and they don't maybe seem too friendly and yada yada. So how can I do this? We have to understand that a lot of cultures from across the world, I've lived abroad, Muslim or not, a lot of them are not as huggy and outspoken and waving to you when they don't know you coming down the street as Midwestern Americans are. I'm from Philadelphia, and it took me a long time. I've been in Minnesota now for 11 years, and I'm still not used to the bear hugs and how friendly and people waving to you when they don't even know you type of thing. I'm not used to that at all. So let alone a lot of other countries that are coming over, and especially for the Muslim community, they end up watching the news too. So they see all these people to them that hate them. So they might see you as your neighbor and be like, well, this person probably hates me and they don't want to talk to me. I just want to keep to myself. It's going to take a great deal of faith from both sides. And that's what I try to do, like I said, with my organization.
And like vulnerability, right? Like it might not go well.
Yeah, it might not go well.
Someone might not want to
But you might be surprised.
Yeah.
You might be surprised. You could peg a neighbor totally wrong, and then all of a sudden, they show up your door with vegetables from their garden, which has happened to me. And because I'm guilty of this too, pegging people wrong. I need to work on this. I need to work on this myself. And be very aware that there is a multi-million-dollar industry that people actually make a living selling hate against Muslims. I think there's over 79 actual organizations who their job, the basis of the premise of their organization, at least partially, is promoting anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic materials and speeches and rhetoric and all that stuff throughout the country. 33 of them, the core of what they do is anti-Islamic. And these are made up of bloggers, authors, people like Pamela Geller and Robert Spencer. All these people, they write these awful books about Islam. And it's actually, a study just came out from this firm, and just Toronto-based firm that looked over, for the past 25 years, over 2 million New York Times headlines. And from this study, they found that the New York Times actually portrays Islam worse than alcoholism and cocaine.
It's startling.
It's startling.
Yeah.
It really is. And I'm kind of getting into that article now. It was referred to me by a friend, but it is quite shocking. It was no surprise that the majority of headlines are anti-Islamic, but actually making it worse, portrays it even worse than cocaine and all these other problems that are much more harmful, take way more lives in our country, who pose an imminent threat to our well-being, like the drug problem, alcohol problem, domestic abuse, all these issues. But yet Islam is portrayed even worse than is seen as more as a national security threat. And the West needs to stop dumping their problems on Islam. And yes, I do equally condemn. I condemn anyone that don't think that Muslims don't condemn people that commit crimes and murder and such in the name of Islam, because we do. When I went into that restaurant, somebody from Houston, Texas messaged me, and they said that they saw the story on their local news. And so I checked it out on their local news, and I was reading some of the comments. And somebody said something like, oh, she's going to go back into that restaurant and blow it up. I go, wow. No, I didn't do that. But somebody else made a comment that said, well, how come she's not going into, some kind of jihadist person and telling them, condemning what they're doing? But, well, if I knew where they were, I would do that.
If they had a sign outside their ice cream
it said, I am about
shop
to attack a mall in the name of Islam, I would be the first person in there with the same kind of thing of, what the heck are you doing?
Right.
I have never met anybody in my life, any Muslim in my life, who has ever shared with me sentiments that they want to do people harm in the name of Islam, that people in this country deserve to be punished because of, U.S. occupations of their homeland, or anything like that. Not once.
And I'm guessing other Muslim people.
I know lots of other Muslim people. But, yes, when I see a sign on your road saying something like that, that's an invitation for me to come in, and I'm going to have a conversation with you. If I knew that guy was going to start stabbing, how are we supposed to know these things?
Yeah.
I could go back to that same person. Okay, how come you didn't go and have a talk with that shooter in that movie theater, before he went in there? As a white American man, how come you didn't go into these places, or these places frequented by, mentally disturbed, jaded, young American male youth, and talk to them about their problems in order to prevent them from shooting up at the next public place? We're losing way more lives by these people, by other Americans that are not Muslim. But we don't care. We don't care as much. But when a Muslim does it, so again, that's going to go for any other group that you might feel peg as the other, blacks, gays, and lesbians. Have a conversation with them. What I've done a few times is people who have really reached out to me and just said hateful things to me. I had a woman contact me, and she said, I live for the day when Muslim women in America will take off their hijabs. I'm like, that's your big dream. Like, that's what you're living for. Okay. And she was a valid atheist. I said, let's get together for coffee. Got together, Panera, met for coffee. And by the end of the conversation, we were laughing and smiling, and we gave each other a hug. And I haven't heard from her since then, but we definitely left on a positive note. I heard her out. I heard her concerns.
Right.
I did. And she told me about a couple encounters that she had with a couple of Muslim neighbors that, yeah, if I were her, I probably would have thought the same thing. They were, kind of ignorant. I'm like, oh, boy. And just, I hear stuff like that, too. I'm like, oh, boy.
Yeah.
This doesn't really help my work. So
there's plenty of idiots.
There's plenty of idiots.
In all walks of life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, Muslims are under a microscope. So anything we do bad, it's going to portray. And if the use of terrorist, let it apply to everybody. Let it apply to everybody. Now that word, terrorism, is saved for Muslims.
Right. But it has an actual functional definition, like an actual terrorist. That is not connected to that at all.
Right.
About the goal of a certain action to big picture, broad fear. Like, it's not.
Right.
It was never about Muslim-based whatever, or alleged Muslim-based whatever.
Yeah.
Like, it's a strange, forced co-opting of a word onto a people. That, yeah, I would love if people would, writers, journalists, in general, would
call them all terrorists, or call them all mentally ill. Pick one. Because when a white person does something like Chapel Hill.
Yeah, or any number of, tiny things every day.
Or Charleston, South Carolina, in that church shooting.
Or Sandy Hook, or, it's been...
Yes, on and on and on. They're mentally ill. But something like Fort Hood, Orlando, no, that's all Islam is to blame. And, people forget. It was barely on the news the same day that the awful tragedy happened in Orlando. There was somebody who was found with the same kind of rifles and stuff in his car, a white guy who was ready to go and attack a gay pride parade right outside of like Santa Monica or something in that area of California. Barely got any news coverage. It happened the same day. And it didn't happen because the neighbor like saw all these like weapons in this guy's car and called the police. But the guy admitted that that's what he was going to do. I don't hear about that guy anymore. He wasn't Muslim. Nobody cared.
Right.
Nobody cared.
Yeah, there's a real framing issue.
Yeah. And even if that guy in Orlando, even if he never claimed allegiance to ISIS right before he did it, like he made that phone call or whatever, the sheer fact that he's got a Muslim name, but the sheer fact that he had an Arab-sounding name is enough. Islam still would have been pegged as being responsible.
Yeah, it would have been
that.
a we can't say for sure kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. It's unbelievable. And it's not just Fox News that does that. You watch CNN, and it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad, too.
Well, I wonder, so to wrap up, because you have a whole community to help. You're very important.
Yeah, and I'm going in 30 different directions.
I wonder, it's a very challenging time, but I wonder if you see, are there positive things you can point to?
Yeah,
I don't know, like down the road, if you see, like, here's some wonderful, like, for me, I see one thing that I will, in my experience, but it's broad strokes, but the Muslim communities that I know of, especially in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota broadly, are becoming even more and more engaged in public life. Political office in very thoughtful, meaningful ways, the way that they show up for things, the way they work together to create economic boosts to the neighborhoods that they're a part of are really pronounced. Because one thing I do see of the Muslim faith in particular, which I think used to be much more viewed by Christian faiths, 50, 100 years ago, is when someone calls, we all come together and support each other in their campaign to fix a problem in a neighborhood or to run for office or to help somebody in need. And it's not just about helping other Muslim folks. I've had my own personal life be helped by folks I know who can say, I have this network of people I can call into action to address a certain issue. So that is a thing I see that as I think more Muslim folks are ready and willing to say, I need to be more of a public person with my life, I see that community I live in benefiting from that directly. So I'm curious if you can speak to some of those positive things.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I am a positive person and I do try to leave any kind of engagement I'm involved in on a positive note. And it is really, it's really easy to get sucked into all the negativity. But yes, absolutely, the amount of support that I've received from the Muslim community, from the non-Muslim community, so far surpasses any kind of negativity. That I want that to be totally clear. And that in and of itself is a sign of we're heading in a positive direction here. Yes, especially up in the cities. In Rochester, not so much. In the cities, the Islamic centers are bigger. They have greater resources and stuff. They have so many wonderful programs there that they're opening their doors and engaging in other religious communities. They're coming together for social issues and issues that benefit everybody in the community. Muslims definitely recognize that we need to do this. First of all, it's our religious obligation to do so. It's our religious obligation to help our community, to make it a better place than what it was when we first encountered it, to make sure we have safe roads, to make sure, we're watching out for our neighbors. These are all Islamic principles, and that's why Islam is so compatible with the American government, the American way of life. So much of America is so already in tune with Islam. And I think this increasing activity of Muslims with civic duties and such, it also comes from, American Muslim scholars, American Muslim leaders have been calling on this for years, that we, Americans need to do this. You can't just come over and just be. You have to be active members of your society and make it a better place, because that's really the true Islamic tradition. And the American Muslim voices speaking out against terrorism, they're out there. It doesn't take long to find the organizations that are on the forefront of American Muslims. It doesn't take much to realize so many faith communities, even in Rochester, so many different religious traditions and stuff have reached out to me and other Muslims in Rochester in solidarity and in support. A peace group, it was like the Southeast Minnesota Alliance of Peacemakers, they pulled together and they raised funds to put a full-page ad in the Rochester Post-Bulletin newspaper in support of Muslims. And it was a huge welcome ad that said, Minnesota will be a welcoming place for Muslims. And all these different local politicians, city council members, heads of organizations all put their names, attached their names to this. So the haters are a small number, and Muslims, we're not going anywhere, and we've been here for a long, long time, and Muslims in America is nothing new. And I will always say that the United States is the most Islamic country in the world.
I like that. I like that as a positive thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Oh, do you have a place people should go if they want to reach out to you or connect with you?
Well, my organization's website, CIDIMN.org. It's CIDIMN.org. You can find all the information on there about the Faith Talk Show. There's a Faith Talk Show page. You can watch. There's links through there to the CIDI YouTube channel. There's also great resources on the CIDI website for just basic information about Islam, links to organizations who have even further more detailed information about Islam if you want to go that far. I have a page on the website that solely deals with misconceptions and stereotypes, and it has a list of great books that you could read. Authors like Jonathan A.C. Brown, he's a professor at Georgetown. He writes extensively about the misconceptions of Sharia or Islamic law. Again, I mentioned Todd Green already, his book, The Fear of Islam, a brief introduction to Islamophobia in the West. He's absolutely fabulous. John Esposito, who's also out of Georgetown, he's a non-Muslim. He writes extensively about Islam and Muslims in the West. There's great resources out there. I also have great links to YouTube videos from Muslim scholars who have been condemning ISIS for a very long time. It's really all there, and you can also find me the CIDI Facebook page. It's on Twitter.
Cool.
As well.
Well, Regina, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, thank you, Levi. Your questions were really good.
That was my conversation with Regina. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly learned a lot. Please check out her organization. There are links in the show notes. I really appreciate Regina's time and openness about her life and her work. Thanks to Taj for leaving a voicemail for this episode. If you want to share a story or response to anything discussed in this episode or other episodes of Not About You, you can send an email, levi@napod.com. Leave a voicemail, 612-361-9261. On Twitter @NotAboutYouPod or Facebook, Not About You. If you want to leave a review on iTunes, that really helps the show get noticed by more folks and spread out these conversations. I really appreciate that. The Not About You theme song is Rebels of Our Own Kind, written and performed by Twin Cities-based musician Charlie Van Stee. Thank you for listening. This is Not About You.